Again, welcome to our presentation, Best Practices and Resources for Undocumented Mixed Status Students. My name is Dr. Sandy Lopez. I am the Director for Undocumented Student Support at NIU, and I will pass it to Tanya to introduce herself.
Sure. My name is Tanya Cabrera. I am the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Inclusion over at UIC, and I also chair the Illinois Dream Fund, the private scholarship for undocumented students. I'm glad to join Dr. Lopez today.
So we're going to start with some terminology just because we know that we have a very large audience and we're not sure of everyone's level as far as knowledge with working and supporting undocumented and mixed status students. So obviously the first term, who is undocumented? It's a person who is in the US without permission from the federal government. People who are not citizens or permanent residents and do not hold a current visa. Also want to be mindful to state that it could be someone who entered the country with the visa and then overstays their visa and becomes undocumented. The term dreamer that's used for students who are undocumented, also part of the DREAM Act movement. Not all undocumented students identify as dreamers, and some who are part of the movement now are demanding allies not to use that term anymore. This is a term that I always say was given to and not chosen by undocumented youth. And it's really important to use terminology that is inclusive for all of our undocumented students in higher ed and not just for some who fit this profile or this notion of a high achieving upper echelon student. So again, being mindful and to be mindful that students should tell us how they want to identify and we shouldn't impose that on students. But what I found often is that once students understand where this term dreamer comes from and the history of the term dreamer, they tend to push back against using that term or that label for themselves. Documented is a term that we have seen being used by some students who have deferred action for childhood arrivals, and they state that they are documented or undocumented. Again, being mindful that not everyone at our institutions or not all college students who are in higher ed have DACA. So this is just for those who have the deferred action for childhood arrivals. Mixed status family refers to students who are part of families that are either a mix of statuses, hence the name, legal permanent residents, US citizens, undocumented individuals. I myself am from a mixed status family. My father was a legal permanent resident up until he passed away. But this term, when I'm talking about, most of the time, my reference to mixed status student is someone who is US born with undocumented parents. And so we ask, why are these conversations, why are these presentations so important? It's because throughout the years, there's been limited access to undocumented immigrants as far as financial funding and support to degree completion. Only 22 states offer some type of access for undocumented students to successfully matriculate towards a college degree. And we know that Illinois is one of those 2 states that has legislation and support from P through 20. And it's super important that we keep abreast on changes in policies and immigration and support and the needs of our undocumented students. And so one thing that we found, and honestly for me, I will speak from my own experience, mixed status students, I really wasn't doing much to support mixed status students at my university until 2016. And it was at the election, and I specifically remember the day after the election seeing a student outside my office shaking. And I said to her, I had no idea you were undocumented. And she said, I'm not, my parents are. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's a whole group of students that we're not supporting, that we're not giving services to. And so it's important that we provide some type of support and visibility and acknowledging the students and their families who are who are directly impacted by the changing immigration legislation and funding and what that means to them, and offering them the resources that they're going to need. Oftentimes our mixed status students are the first in their families, right, to attend college. So that success piece, the scholarship, the engagement, similar to a first generation student, Mixed status students have a lot more layered on top of them, as do our undocumented students, a lot more worry and concern for their families and just navigating higher ed, and also the other obstacles that might be put in their way, such as FAFSA and being financially literate. So making sure that we're helping mixed status students understand, and their families understand, that they can apply to the FAFSA. They have to enter the zeros. They have to print off the signature page. But sometimes even that's not enough. Sometimes even helping our students get to that point, it's not enough, because sometimes they'll come up for verification, and that scares parents. There's an extra letter that has to be written. And sometimes it could be something super easy, stating where your income is coming from, or just additional support. And that can be very scary, because parents sometimes think that it's going to be a reporting of some system, but the university is just asking for that additional information. So helping families and guiding students and their parents and just, helping bring that uncertainty or that fear down, and letting them know that, yes, they do qualify for this type of funding if they're US born. Also the wraparound services, right? We see a lot of our students that need this, both on and off campus, for legal, mental health, housing, food insecurity, like so many of our students. But sometimes our mixed status students don't understand that they do qualify for some benefits and some support and resources, because they keep thinking that if their parents are undocumented, they may not have access to certain things. So that's why it's so important to start creating visibility. And honestly, using this term mixed status, I still have students, when they hear that, they say, I didn't know that was a word. That's me. Like, they don't even know this term exists for them. And there are 4.5 million and growing. And actually, I think it might be up to 6 million growing mixed status students in our country. And so we have to be mindful, because this is a population that is being erased. Just some data for you all to have, to know, how many, of the 125,000 undocumented youth who are reaching high school age, only 98,000 are graduating every year. And sadly, only 5 or 10% of them will go on to college. And we have approximately, 643,560 undocumented immigrants currently benefiting from the Daca program. And this is from data from March of 2020 from USCIS, remembering that when we started at the height of DACA, there were 880,000. And that didn't mean that was the only number. It was just, that was the only number that had applied when we first started. And now these numbers are dropping. And as of September 2019, there's an estimated 1,322,000 who are DACA eligible and waiting. And sadly, we know that DACA, and Tanya will give a little update about where we are with DACA right now, but we again are in this uncertainty, and it is again under attack, right? So just being mindful of who has it, who doesn't have it, and remembering that DACA recipients are, from all over the globe: Mexico, Central America, South America, Asia, Africa, Europe, the Caribbean, and you can see the data and the numbers there on this slide. You'll have access to this later, so I'm not going to read all of the information on there. Again, just Illinois specifically, right? So if we're looking at Illinois, 511,000 undocumented immigrants, and 8% of our Illinois undocumented population have attended college, but haven't earned that degree yet. 34,330 DACA recipients. And then we still have people who are DACA eligible, about 67,000 who are waiting for that to open up again. And then 29% have a high school diploma but haven't attended college. And again, you can see the breakdown as far as, Chicago, the collar counties, and suburban Cook, as far as the immigrants in that area, undocumented immigrants in those areas.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez. And this is just some data from the Migrant Policy Institute. The President's Alliance worked with the Migrant Policy Institute to extract some data that they've been doing over the last decade. And we noticed from this data, what we've known to be true for many years, is that first, second, and third generation immigrants have kept college doors open at 60%. And in the state of Illinois, that's about 26,000. And when we looked at the average gap for our students in Illinois who not only received MAP funding or who would have been eligible for it, there's still that $4,000 to $6,000 gap. And that's about $17.2 million that undocumented immigrants give to institutions across the state of Illinois. And with regards to the recent legislative changes, it's taken us over a decade, and the legislators in Springfield weren't always on our side, but to implement the training, right? We know that this population needs service and support to successfully matriculate. And the Illinois Board Higher Education Strategic Plan, that was the main thing of providing equitable access to all individuals, regardless of their status. And so with the passing of the bill, the Undocumented Student Liaison and the Resource Bill, we want to make sure that there's support and consideration of looking at the policies and procedures at our institutions, both community college and four-year, to ensure that they're providing equitable access to students regardless of their status, so that they could successfully matriculate or transition to a four-year partner. This is just a breakdown overview. We know we had the Activated Bill in 2003, providing in-state tuition, and then the Illinois DREAM Act with the P through 20 training, the 529 savings plan, and the scholarship application. In 2012, we got access to DACA, right? And we knew that it was something temporary, and knew that the end goal was always a pathway to citizen, not only for the students, but for their families collectively. In 2013, we have the TVDL driver's license. I'm sure you heard, if you were here with us all day today, you heard Itakita talking about specifically the TVDL licensure and how to use that as a form of ID when traveling. In 2019 was Governor Pritzker is now on the scene in Illinois, and professional licensure. Stephen Monroy, who was with MALDIF at the time, worked on the Public Act 11078, which allowed undocumented immigrants who didn't have DACA. And remember, in 2018 was about the last time that we were able to see first-time applicants or applications being accepted and then halted. And so we know present day, no current applications or new applications are being accepted. But in 2019, we needed to adapt and then establish something for I-10 holders. And that was a professional licensure bill, Public Act 11078. And then again, so many immigrant-friendly bills were in the state of Illinois. We really did great with something that we had been working with students alongside. They haven't always been the main advocates who we supported in pushing this legislation and say, hey, we need financial funding. And so accessing financial funding through state aid through the MAP award is about 5,340 max. Again, still leaving a large gap for students. And just recently, the House Bill 3438, the Undocumented Student Liaison Bill with regards to training sessions beginning in July. But this is an opportunity that we know individuals who've already been doing this work who will now have a title or a similar title to make them accessible and long-term at their institution to support undocumented students that have a go-to person on campus that they could identify with to provide that support. And we're working with the President's Alliance and the Migrant Policy Institute to look at our data in Illinois and say, hey, if we did this in Illinois, let's do it in California. Let's do it with other, the 66 undocumented resource centers across this US. So really exciting stuff. And we look forward to them being all named and supported. And this is the training, right? For years, we've been doing trainings with institutions, but we've never been able to secure all the institutional partners. So now that this is a state mandate, the Illinois Dream Fund will lead the training in July with the IBHE and the ICCB. Our Senator Villanueva will be present for these trainings to provide support and more understanding about the appropriations of the funding. But this is really to make sure all faculty and staff, and they're like, oh, we'll send our liaison. No, we want admissions, financial aid, academic advisors, chairs for the departments, right? Anyone dealing with retention and matriculation within the institution should attend the session, right? And when we request 33 offices to attend, it's like, hey, that's too many. It can't just be the liaison providing all that support. And so we want to make sure as they're reviewing on designing and implementing evaluation programs and policies and procedures, that they also have two co-chairs to establish the undocumented student task force at their institution, right? Bringing all the stakeholders to campus and admissions, academic advising, and say, hey, what are we currently doing? And what do we need to change to provide the support? And then outside of this is where we take the actual liaisons and do some training. Sandy was doing some training, another colleague reached out, and we want to make sure that our liaisons are equipped to provide the support. And when Nidikere mentioned earlier today about EIN and I-10 filing, all these are professional development that we will bring specifically to those liaisons so that they could provide that support at their institution. And again, here, we want them to serve as advocates for students on campus and develop strategic plans and programmings to support both undocumented and mixed status students on campus. And the big thing for them to serve as subject matter experts for leadership when reviewing policy and protocol on campus. And one thing that Dominican University, I'm not sure if we have anybody on today, but Dominican University, along with BASO at the time, developed, we have as institutional partners, if we have international students on our campus, USCIS comes to our campus. However, institutions have the right, and this undocumented student task force committee will be able to look at that policy and say, hey, we need a 2 weeks notice to anytime USCIS is coming on campus, and establish that type of protocol at your institution. Sandy, is this?
That's you.
I'm not sure if this is slide 15, but professional licensure was a bill that we talked about. A lot of states have different policies with regards to allowing access. Obviously, we're mirroring a lot of California's laws, but we know that Utah and Colorado are also looking at these opportunities. We'll talk about some issues with Texas going on in a little bit, but this again was in 2018 and it was effective in 2019. And as you see here, the different descriptions, nursing, I know people like, why was it such a big issue to get nursing through? Because it's through the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulations, they have their own accreditation, which is Illinois Department of Public Health. And they have a registry where we did not want students to get tracked. And so talking individual to talk to them, say, hey, not only are the background check companies willing to do this, administrators at the institutions are doing this. And so it was great to have the Illinois Department of Public Health finally sign on an agreement to allow ITIN holders to now go through the background check and enter the program. And the next step is establishing a co-op opportunity for these ITIN holders, not only in the nursing field, but in other professions throughout the state. So what the application, one of the recommendations that we requested, because the bill is effective immediately. And so this is allowing institutions of higher ed, both at the community college and at the four-year level, to still currently enroll students who are considering this profession. On the application process, for example, on the CNA application, there's different options that they want to put. That meeting is going to happen at the end of May with regards to how we'll put verbiage on the application moving forward within the Illinois Department of Public Health and their healthcare registry. But this bill is effective immediately so that community colleges and four-year partners can enroll students in this program. And I want to, one of our subject matter experts, Livia Moreno, we're using some of her verbiage in here. So thank you, Livia, for joining us. Sandy?
Can I say something back to that the other slide? So we were at a session earlier, not everybody has DACA, and people were asking, what about the background check? This was added after the previous bill, the licensure one that said you could sit for an exam, a certification with your ITIN number. It got them to the exam, but it didn't help our students get past the background check. This is going to help us get past the background check, the 4332. And so that's so important because we thought we were there, right? We thought, okay, we passed this bill in 2019 and this allows them to sit. But then there was a gatekeeping at the background check where they said, well, nope, you still need a social for that. And that's what that bill that just passed is going to help us address. I just wanted to put that out there because there were questions about it at a previous session.
Sandy, I'm not sure if this is you.
It's you again. You're
okay. Sorry, thank you. I can't see the number on the slide. So with regards to DACA, we know that we're getting, there are students who are still eligible, thankful to some organizations through the Illinois Coalition of Immigrant Refugee Rights do have DACA renewal applications for students. A lot of their community-based organizations still have opportunities for students who may need funding if they qualify to receive a waiver through these CBOs. But we know that, it is not anything on the table. Some other bills being pushed forward, but the only bill that both students and advocates of students are supporting is a pathway to citizenship for all, inclusive, an opportunity to repeat, I don't want to say repeat what Reagan did, but to allow a pathway to citizenship for all families. And with regards to the DACA numbers, for those who would have been eligible, we know there's no first-time applicants being accepted, and a lot of students wondering like how can I reapply? And with the current state of DACA, and again, get a session if you missed it, please check it out and listen to it in detail, because it talks about the limbo right now, right? Where DACA said, hey, we'll go back to accepting first-time applications, and then those who already applied can file again. Or no, we're going to release it again and then change some requirements and say, hey, only these students can apply. Again, limiting access, which is why the only thing that is on the table is a pathway to citizenship. Advanced parole, again, it's very important if since you're leaving the US without authorization, can have its own consequences. And that's why we highly encourage students to visit their institutional lawyer at their institution or through a trusted community-based organization to see whether or not it is risky for them to travel if they have DACA. Also, if they don't have DACA, traveling throughout the states using an actual ID, and Kita spoke earlier about having a TVDL. But then also, if you don't have DACA, traveling to Puerto Rico, what would that look like, right? And the risk through all travel experiences, but being mindful to consult with the lawyer prior to making those trips. Sandy, Doctora Lopez.
So I want to share some information or some best practices that is coming from the President's Alliance on Higher Education Immigration. I also want to be mindful to going back to, the undocumented liaison bill. When you're looking at this checklist here and when you're seeing what the President's Alliance is recommending, this job or this liaison position is a full-time position. People are getting a lot of pushback, and I understand, there's pushback because we're not asking for a new position to be created. There's already people doing the work at institutions. Give them that title is what we're asking, and give them that opportunity to do that work. So for example, as I'm going through this list and you're seeing all that we're asking, or all that, the President's Alliance is saying, best practices, campus, for your campus. This is something that I have an entire office. I have an assistant director. I have graduate students, undergraduate students, and student workers, right? And we are busy around the clock. And I can't tell you because you're constantly onboarding students, you're constantly educating students and families and communities and professionals. And then there's a lot here, as you can see, developing a rapid response plan. What are you going to do? I've been hearing a lot of people say, oh, we're going to combine international office with the undocumented office. Please do not do that. You're putting undocumented students in harm's way. While you may have good intentions, they are not the same population. They do not have the same needs. And here's the important, if you take anything away, please take this away. ICE has the ability to come in and audit your international office. They have the right to come into that space. Why would you house undocumented student information in the same office that ICE would have access to? So please, make sure those are separated. Make sure, go ahead, Tanya. I think you're going to say something.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for saying that, Sandy, because we just had a conversation with Brian from the ICCB and Ginger from the IBHE yesterday with regards to some of the appointments that institutions are making. And the pushback that we're giving is like, hey, financial aid already has someone, they already have a heavy load, and that's something they're not going to be able to make the time to meet with these students. And so definitely not anyone from the Office of International Services or that dealing with USCIS, again, because of this tracking. And so when those recommendations came through on the call yesterday, we said, hey, we specifically do not want an individual from these departments to be directly working with this student. We know that they'll work with the liaison and the student on their own cases, but definitely not from the international student offices. So those are requests that we let leadership know, and we hope that both the community colleges may, will explore some additional options for us.
And so I also want to come back to this rapid response and training faculty and staff and utilizing FERPA to protect students' information. It's so important too that we do this training across campus, because not every student's going to come to that one person. Not every student's going to find you or your office or that position. So it's important that faculty, staff, even housing people get trained. That's the one way that I was able to connect with a student. I had a residence hall director said, oh, I went to your ally training and I had the sign by my door, and the student said, where's that? And he was able to connect me. Again, it could be campus wide, because students don't all know about us, don't know about the resources or the services that we have. The other part is, the legal representation and the screenings. Yes, it's important for us to get our students. I hear all the time, make sure they talk to an immigration lawyer. Well, that's expensive. Our students can't afford that. So if you can build relationships with nonprofits or attorneys or campus clinics that you could hold, and you could help provide these services to your students free of charge. It's so important that our students understand the resources and what's available to them, as well as ways to adjust status if that's an option, right? The one that I can think of is the immigrant, the youth, the juvenile visa. I had 2 students that could have possibly applied to that, but they aged out before I even knew the juvenile visa existed, right? If they had been abandoned here before the age of, like, I think it was 21. I have to go back and look at that law specifically, but looking at all these different pieces and how are we sharing this information, right? Bringing in immigration lawyers to do an immigration 101 like Irakere did, so students do know their options. The other part too is having that conversation and developing relationships with your state legislative liaison, your federal legislative liaison. When there are laws that are happening, I'm in constant communication with at the state level and at the federal level. So we're pushing out and we're saying we're trying to support immigrant-friendly legislation that's going to affect our students directly. Go ahead, Tanya. Other things, your policies, do an audit of, like, where are there blocks, where are there barriers that we're creating. Also, really, really important is this language around students, right? We can't call student. I feel like DACA is the new dreamer. Like, everyone has DACA, right? Everyone was a dreamer before. Be mindful of the language that you're using and how students want to identify, again, because not all of our students have DACA. Not all of our students, even if it opens up, not all of our students will qualify for DACA. Not all of our students are RISE applicant, eligible, our recent arrivals. So we have all these tiers of inequity that are being caused because of the current immigration system, where you have people who are coming from out of state and recent arrivals, and those with DACA, those without. And so be mindful of the language that you're using and how you're including everyone into this conversation, as well as all ethnicities. And look at your admissions policies and your tuition policies, and challenge your your advancement team, or your university advancement team that brings in scholarships to remove citizenship requirements from those pieces and scholarships, and then making sure that you have a good relationship with your admissions team, with everyone across campus, admissions, financial aid, the bursars, mental health counselors. Again, this is a lot that is beyond just a part-time position, right? If I'm going to be there advocating for students in all these different areas, it would be hard for me to do that and my other job. This is a full-time job for me. And then again, just being in collaboration, working with others across the state to see who's doing what, best practices at higher ed institutions. I'm constantly, Luvia, Tanya, and I are constantly going back and forth and like, hey, what about this policy? Or hey, what about this? Also, the Coalition for Educators in Illinois, for undocumented students in Illinois, that Facebook page, we get a lot of questions that come in through there as well. But we have to be mindful to reach out and to look for funding opportunities and access for all students, and opportunities, graduate students. We have a lot of students, because of their DACA status, or lack of DACA status, I should say, they continue on with their degree and they try to continue and stay in school a little longer, hoping that something's going to change, right? What are we doing to support our graduate students? There's not much. A lot of the scholarships are just for undergraduate students. Try to create funding opportunities that help graduate students. Try to create, at NIU, we have graduate tuition waivers for I-10 holders. So even if you don't have DACA, you could get a tuition waiver at NIU if you're a graduate student. There's a scholarship fund that I'm able to allocate some scholarship money to graduate students, specifically who are undocumented. And so those are things we have to start looking at and supporting our students, not just undergrads, but at the graduate level and through terminal degrees as well.
Dr. Lopez, can you talk about the student fee that you established at Northern?
Yeah, so and I think U of I may have one similar. So we wanted to do a student fee on every to put a student fee out for every student, and then we could create a scholarship for undocumented students. What we found was we wanted to do an opt-in and opt-out. Our president didn't think it was a good idea because it would set a precedence for opting in and out of fees. So what we ended up doing was we ended up using some of the student fee money that gets allocated to students who have financial need from the Student Government Association. And this was something that they voted on and they passed at like an 83% rate, that they were willing to support undocumented students with a scholarship from student fee money. So it's not an extra fee, but it's part of the student fee money that once certain, awards are given out, what's left over can be allocated to undocumented students at the undergraduate and the graduate level. But the students of Dream Action didn't stop there. They didn't say just undocumented students. They said, if there's money left over, we want to help students in need. We want to help our mixed status students. We want to help our students who are low income or who are homeless. So every once in a while, at the end of the semester, if there's money that's left over, I can allocate it to mixed status students, to homeless students, or to low income students. And we have helped a few that were kind of in limbo. So that's something that was created again through student fee money and through advocacy of our undocumented students working with our Student Government Association. The Student Government Associations have money. Y'all need to make sure that your students are asking them, like, where's this money going? Your communication plan, have a social media account. We know our undocumented students are not on Facebook that much. We have to move it over to Instagram. We have to move it over other ways. But put out your messaging and have a clear plan of what happens, what support, what mental health, what support groups are there for your Black undocumented, your queer undocumented, your Asian undocumented students, right? And so we borrow a lot of information from Immigrants Rising that has some really great support groups that meet. We borrow stuff from some of y'all. I'm sure we're grabbing some of your events as well that we're sharing, but having a plan, DACA is now, you can renew it online. But should everybody renew it online? Let's pause for a moment and think. If you've had, if you recently, were smoking cannabis and someone stopped you, maybe you need to talk to a lawyer first and then think about applying, right? So there are certain things that are gonna be like, well, if you haven't, run into any issues, or it's, you're fine, and you're like, nope, I haven't had any run-ins with the law or anything, you can now renew it online. And there are different tutorials, different lawyers who are doing stuff like that. But the messaging that you need to send out about what things are changing, what's happening on your campus, be mindful of having the same plan so that you're all messaging the same thing, right? You all are unison in that. The other part that we're still trying to get right is the holistic career services piece, right? Kudos to our career services office. They're awesome. We are trying to do more with students and especially our ITIN holders to how to look for a job, how to put yourself out there, how to network. And in those pieces, we're fine. We are doing really well there. It's that part, how do you work if you have an ITIN and you don't have work authorization? If I had that answer, I would be a millionaire, because we can't get there yet, right? But we all, and to Cindy Augustine, thank you for doing the call to action and saying we as accomplices need to work on that next step for career guidance and support services to helping our students come up with alternative income options, right? So we too are trying to give scholarships on campus for our students if they do work, right? We have some engagement opportunities where students volunteer their time and they get a stipend. We need more of that for our ITIN holders. We need more opportunities where our students can get experience and work, but get paid, not just be interns for free. So those are all sort of things that we're constantly looking back to this checklist and trying to be mindful of as we're moving forward. Go ahead, Tanya.
And so some of the best practices that we've talked about is being inclusive to students, regardless of ethnicity. And a lot of times in the media, we see this as just a brown issue, but it is a diverse group of immigrants who are directly being impacted, and make sure we're finding ways to support them to degree completion. And we know the biggest barrier being funding. ensure that at your institution, amazing counselors, but we want to make sure that someone has that experience of working with immigrants, refugees, or asylum seekers to have a better understanding for when students come in. They know that someone's there that is familiar with their situation. Develop an option to include your affidavit. I know one of the questions that came up in meetings with liaisons is like, hey, how do you get with the affidavit, right? UIC includes it in its application through the Common App for incoming freshmen, we put it in there. But think of different ways if you can make it easier for students to access, or looking at those policies and procedures, like say, hey, if you don't submit your affidavit, we won't review your application, and say, hey, maybe that's something that we have to consider because students may not know that they have to complete this affidavit. Again, removing that, Dr. Lopez talked about removing that citizen status requirement with our institutional advancement when they're out looking for funding. It really makes it a lot easier. And this is an example from Luvia's previous employer at Northeastern, something that they did in their advancement team. We said, wow, that's amazing. Imagine if all our institutional partners. So again, these are best practices and recommendations that we'll be sharing with our institutions that we hope that they'll be able to implement for next year. And so that when we submit our annual report to our legislators, we can give somewhat of a report card and say, hey, look at these institutions and what they're doing. And that way the Migrant Policy Institute and the President's Alliance could review this data through the clearinghouse and let us know how well our students are doing and how they're matriculating, while also monitoring the legislative changes that are taking place. Develop and enforce a clear policy on campus with regards to our campus police, that they are not USCIS agents, that the legislation does not allow them to be deputized by USCIS agents, and to be mindful of how to work with this population and how some interactions may be triggering to them. Establishing that emergency plan for when ICE does come or USCIS does come to campus. And be mindful how they come to campus, if they just park on the side and they make their presence known. And again, Dr. Lopez was talking about how students utilize social media and say, hey, so-and-so is by the rec center, be mindful, and blah, blah, blah. And then students start freaking out. And, you know, I will say when Sandy and I, we always talk about when we put on the CLIS account, be mindful of what we're posting and what may be triggering. We ask you to do the same when you're working with students, is to, hey, should I mention this, or be mindful of the words you say because they do matter. Dr. Lopez talked about the institute, a student fee. Another recommendation, we know that with regards to this new role, there's no funding to it, but we actually gave Senator Villa in session said that, hey, even though this is the Board of Trustees and the statute will appoint someone, you know, this is considered a full-time position at the executive and director level. And because both community colleges and four-year institutions are different and get different financial funding, you know, some institutions may not be prepared for that, but they have had a whole year to prepare and implement a full-time position for this role. So we look forward to that further development and institutionalizing it at the campuses across Illinois. Make sure we're listing all the resources available. And that's why we have to be mindful of what we're putting out there and making sure they're legit and they're not taking advantage of our students or charging for to file for an I-10 application, which is a free application. We have to be mindful that our students and their families are not being taken advantage of. Dr. Lopez?
Tanya and I wanted to share some resources that we have. We did a presentation, a collective one, which I hope we can bring back again, actually. We did this in the summer a few years ago, and it was all the community colleges that wanted to share and the four-year institutions. And we all had slides similar to this one, where we shared like at our admissions level, our resource, our support, our funding options. And I think we all need to create something like this collectively so students can see that there are opportunities at institutions and at community colleges. So in our admissions section, you know, we have a guide. I'm so proud of the work that we have done at NIU admissions. Their counselors get trained every year. If there are new ones that are onboarding, we do updates for them. We have identified go-to key people in the admissions office that we work with. I'm sure they hate me because I blow up their phone all the time. I'm constantly like dialing, hey, I need some help with. There's just a lot of support in the sense from the admissions team. They invite us to go table at events that are, going to have parents there. And it's so important. Someone had mentioned, like, how do you involve families and parents? This especially, I feel, for our undocumented, our mixed status students, there's so much uneasiness, uncertainty there that we have to be at these spaces. Again, it is a full-time job because you're all over and in all places and spaces advocating and pushing out resources. We have a website that I'll show you in a second for undocumented students. We have resource guides. We have an undocumented student org which is really important to have an active undocumented student org because we have to hear from them directly. Again, always, nothing for us, about us, without us. It has to be with them, for them, and about them. We bring immigration lawyers to do Immigration 101, Know Your Rights, DACA. We are honored to have Irakere as an NIU alum. So he does come back often and help us with presentations. And he is a friend to NIU and to the undocumented students of Dream Action NIU. So we're very fortunate with him and Jeremy Lime and Aurora that do those presentations. We have faculty advocates for undocumented students who bring gift cards. They help feed our students. They help with school supplies. And then they help with research projects and inviting us into their classrooms. So we have that support, again, more campus-wide. We have the president from NIU who actually spoke at this year's Coming Out of the Shadows event to say that we need to support our students and that they belong on our campus. Board of trustees, the state and federal liaisons that work with me and call me if there's a law. And then as far as funding opportunities, thankfully to the RISE Act, it opened up so much opportunity, one of them being the Husky Pledge. Freshmen with a 3.0 and families earning under $75,000 a year will be eligible for the Husky Pledge, which covers tuition and fees, and it could be renewable if they maintain that 3.0 GPA. There's merit funding, there's foundation scholarships, they can do research and get paid, they can volunteer and get paid with or without DACA. Those research opportunities don't matter. And then we have undocumented specific funding from the Promise Fund to a Dream Scholarship to an emergency fund created by alumni from NIU. So there's so many other opportunities and funding. And as I mentioned before, we have tuition waivers for our I-10 graduate students. So just a snapshot, there's our social media. Please, I would love for people, if y'all have a social media page, drop it into the link. It would be great for us to follow each other and share best practice like that on social media where we're promoting each other's events and resources and opportunities. I love CLC, their group, their student group started following us and we've been sharing information. College of Lake County, they were super active. And I was surprised, like during the pandemic, they were like on it. And so it's great for us to share information back and forth across campus and throughout the state of Illinois. Here you see our undocumented student website. If you go to NIU's website and you type the word undocumented, this comes up. There's a video that gives you a short tour. It's a 2-minute video. And then you see all these ways to get involved, financial help. And then at the top, funding, training, and then for people to donate. Always, always, always provide an opportunity for people to give money to undocumented students, right? If they're there and they're listening and they're supportive, just hit them up, right? Hit them up for a little donation because a little bit can go a long way. Tanya?
Absolutely, Sandy, Dr. Lopez. And I will say that Dr. Lopez has and her group out there, to have that team is amazing. And the work that you do definitely impacts students and generations at this point. With regards to UIC, we do include our affidavit in the application. A lot of our funding beyond state aid is the UIC Opportunity Grant, which is about $3,700 for the year, about $1,850 per semester on top of additional MAP funding. So about $4,520 per semester, a student, an undocumented immigrant may be eligible for funding at UIC, but again, it still leaves a gap. And one of the things that we have, the national partnership, and I believe there's 9 partnering institutions with the national partner of the Dream US. This is the golden ticket scholarship for transfer students and some income freshmen. Unfortunately, UIC only takes transfer students at this time, but it's $7,750 per semester. So it really helps close the gap so students can focus on their studies, obtain those internships. We do provide a partial scholarship of $250 for Daca renewals. And then we also have our community-based partners who provide funding. We did just hire a new immigration lawyer, so we're excited to bring her back. Our lawyer Ditto will now be reviewing our students for ITIN and EIN filing opportunities. And so a partner on campus and many partners on campus, one of them being Lattes, also offers scholarship opportunities for our undocumented students, and the link has their scholarship page. We have emergency funding for students, anywhere between $2,000 and $5,000 should they come into any medical expenses or need additional funding for housing changes, food insecurities. We have emergency funding available. Additional scholarships and financial funding opportunities. These are the ones that when Dr. Lopez talked about financial funding opportunities, looking outside for different partners to help us financially for students and really focusing on what our graduate and professional track students are looking for. Dr. Lopez? Sorry, this is still me. So with the Illinois Dream Fund, we recently partnered with the President's Lion, the Dream US, and Immigrants Rising because we had a national convening of the undocumented student resource centers across the US. In Philadelphia, a couple of my colleagues, Quintiano Rios, who is now the interim undocumented student liaison at Northeastern, and our graduate student, Michelle Valdez, attending this conference and learning about the resources and support. And so we'll be chairing a committee at the national level of sharing resources and support. And one thing that they're looking at in the state of Illinois is the training that we're developing for the institutions of higher ed and how we can set an example for the California 3-tier system to also look into training as a collective effort on the 3-tier system. California is so huge. But looking at best practices of ensuring that we're sharing the right information and talking about different ways that we're supporting ITIN students or those non-DACA students and creating access for them. It's a huge conversation. And I know a couple of our liaisons and subject matter experts from the Illinois Dream Fund will be joining us for a call to look at the discussion and the proposal of different legislations there that are coming up. And this is something that with regards to students, they wanted us to let us know, right? That we want you to listen, that in a way that they can best support them is listening to them, having that ear to have that conversation, a shoulder to cry on. It really means a lot, and not necessarily to give advice, but just to listen to them. Respecting their space, and Dr. Lopez talked about this as well, is making sure that our students could hold space, that we don't have to speak for them. They have their own voices, they're using their voices. And again, these are the students who over 2 decades have been advocating for resources and support and using their voice to advocate for themselves. So we want to make sure that they hold their own space and claim it. Make sure we're keeping them updated, making sure that they're aware of the different organizations and resources available, opportunities to maybe study abroad at your institution where funding is allocated, not only to help them with their advanced parole application, but flight and travel. I know there's some opportunities at a few institutions like that. So again, these are ways that we could help students long-term by providing access and opportunities to experiences like this. And they want to say thank you. You know, we know the work is never ending and it's necessary. We don't get a lot of thank yous, but you know, students want to let them know like, hey, we know this work isn't easy and we're thankful that we have you at our side to walk this path with us, and that we're appreciated and they respect us, and they can never say, thank you will never suffice for all the work that these liaisons, that those who support them, you know, both at the community college levels as high school counselors, CBOs, we know that they are appreciative, and that they said that thank you will never be enough. And we thank you for all the time and support you provide for students. Here's a list of resources and support throughout the state and at the national level that we wanted to make sure you had access to. And I think the President's Alliance has a portal state by state, so you can visit that data, but I highly encourage you to look at that Migrant Policy Institute data. So as your institution says, like, hey, I don't think we should do this. When we talk about the next pool of applicants that are going to keep our doors open, it is this immigrant community. And so we need to make sure that institutions are prepared to serve this population. And we'll leave it open for questions right now.
Thank you, Tanya. I know there's a few in the chat here. Let me see if I can come back to them. They're asking for the CNA. Is it the documents and information for CNA, is that available on the website?
They're changing. The Illinois Department of Public Health is actually having these next 2 weeks before the end of May. They're having their sessions, and we actually meet on Friday to kind of the last revision for the verbiage that they're putting on the applications and across their board on their website page. So it's going to be bringing everybody to the table on Friday to kind of walk through what everything is going to look like. And so I'm excited. And Sandy, if you're available, you're going to have to join me to have some extra eyes on to look at it and make sure that it's something that reflects that students will be able to access. And I think we're going to have 2 lawyers on board just to make sure there's no issues with tracking or potential tracking issues that we may oversee. Thank you. That's a really good question.
Yeah, was that the one? So someone is also asking about tracking and how it will be done, the method after the best method at each school.
With regards to tracking students on campus?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't.
So that's not something we actually recommend. And I know that some institutions like, well, it helps us, it makes it easier for us, right? And even though with regards to FOIA requests, I always, students are already hyper documented. So I don't understand why we need more documentation, or why students, for example, at an institution will have to go to OIS through HR, then to the Office of International Services, then to Student Services for like 3 different offices, self-expose themselves, triggering trauma, just try to work for someplace, right? You know, all these hurdles that they have to overcome, and just making it an easy process. We don't recommend tracking. We know that that makes extra work for you. Some offices in their admissions offices track students through a letter number, right? Like a in-state tuition, IIT, IST, and then they'll put IL, right? Or different verbiage that we use to kind of track students, but not necessarily tracking them. At UIC, for example, we use a system called iAdvise, and I just get referrals through that system. And then I'm made aware the student may or may not be undocumented. One thing that I think colleges, and I think Harper did this, and UIC did it as well, with regards to taking additional survey for incoming freshman or transfer students and asking them, here's 10, 15 questions. Do you have any food insecurities? Would you like more resources for food? Would you like to know about daycare opportunities? Would you like more access and information to resources for undocumented and mixed status households? And if they check that, then students are referred to me, and I'm able to connect with them and say, hey, I'd like to connect, you answered this question, I'd like to provide more resources and support. We're having a Zoom on this day, blah, 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 blah. And going back to what, I hope that answers the question of we don't want to encourage tracking, because we don't want third-party entities. And something that we didn't talk about, Sandy, and maybe we could throw a slide in here, is actually putting like suppressing the directory information so that people aren't tracking them. And they have access to that at all our institutions through the registrar's office. And they could lift that hold when they're looking for employers for hiring to say like, oh, did Tanya Cabrera work? Or was she at UIC and graduated in this degree? Say, yes, she did. And, you know, when you lift that status. And so different ways that we could protect them and have them feel more safe on our college campuses is, one, not disclosing their information, and definitely not tracking them. When Sandy talked about those 2, we had in June of 2020, I think, we tried to get as many institutional partners again. The IBHE and the ICCB want to do that again in the months of June and July. I'm like, yeah, I got time. So in June, asking all institutional partners to give 2 slides. Some said, what if we just have 1 slide? I'm like, well, we know what kind of services you provide. But one of the recommendations, in order to be visible and in order to have this platform working with undocumented students, you have to be already implementing some of these best practices, right? We're not going to put someone who's not going to have it all, bring it all to the table, and making sure that they're using the right verbiage, right? That they not only offer state aid, but they offer additional institutional aid and have the resources available, mental health, and they've identified a liaison. If they don't have that, we have to unfortunately say like, hey, we'll wait for you to get that, but we can't highlight your institution. So starting those sessions out again for webinars. And then we wanted to also, a lot of the liaisons are stated that they wanted to get together. So I think providing a space, hopefully we could all meet at UIC this summer and hold space and actually connect and just share again. We hope to do this at Sharing the Dream this year in Carbondale, because we got an Airbnb and made it happen. But we hope that we could unite this summer just to share resources and best practice with everyone.
And I know we already talked a little bit about, what if they're trying to not make this a full position, and this is something that is not unique. We're hearing this quite a bit, that, it's being added onto a role instead of a position. So Tanya is mindful of it. She's working. Again, this work is all coming through the Illinois Dream Fund, right? And so sometimes I want to be cognizant that my institution said this is a good idea to have this role, right? But it's coming through the Illinois Dream Fund. And so it's not that our institutions are telling all institutions what to do. That's not what this is about. This is about there's a need, undocumented students have asked for this need, and the Illinois Dream Fund is going to lead the charge on the training and follow through and all of that. I'm chuckling a little bit at someone who asked, like, I'm just a grad student. What can I do other than just snitch on my school? So one of the things that you are a student, and that gives you power. That's what I want to say, right? First and foremost, student voices are important voices on our campus. Y'all have power. What I do recommend, though, is that if you are not directly affected, and if you're an ally or you want to be an accomplice, please reach out to the undocumented students at your institution and ask them, what are y'all fighting for? How can I support you? Because we don't want to, and this happens a lot where people want to help, but they don't understand that there's already been a lot of work done, or where they should, amplify a bit more. So go to those undocumented students, find that space and amplify those issues for them. That's the best way you can be an accomplice. If they're talking to someone and they, if they want to pass you the mic, take over that mic and educate yourself on what your school is or is not doing and what they can do better. We all have work to do. We can all improve. So thanks for putting that out there. But just remember, as a student, you pay fees, you pay tuition, you have power.
Thank you, Sandy. And the pushback that we get, and I'm willing to visit institutional partners. I'm thankful to UIC allowing me the opportunity to ensure that we could implement this legislation with our institutional partners and share best practice. And both Sandy and Luvia throughout the years have been doing these trainings. And so we know how both the community college and higher ed systems work. And we just want to make sure that we know that funding is different on all levels, but yes, you have to hire someone. And I know I talked about like, hey, you got to be paid. We want between 70 and 95,000. Like, hey, let's be realistic. At the community college, we could do this. And, I said, well, these people are going to be coming in with masters with experience, or who are directly impacted in doing this work and who want to work back in their communities or at their alma maters. And so you're going to make the financial decision to pay them what be. I know that in the conversation with Senator Villanueva, hey, is there any appropriation of funding? And there was appropriation of funding given to both higher ed, both community colleges and four-year institutions. And so you should have allocated this funding. We're not trying to, and I don't want to get Sandy in trouble, but she is a subject matter expert. She also a liaison for the state. And so this is not coming from UIC or NIU. It's just, this is a state mandate for the Illinois Dream Fund. We were written into the state statute to do the training, and we're following up because it has taken over 10 years to try to make this a reality. We know our kids are suffering. We're doing this work on a daily basis, and we've been doing it for decades. And we're saying we just want the name and the title, and to have students to feel like they have that sense of belonging, that they know that, hey, we've worked so hard. After, counselors, the high school counselors, like, hey, where do I go to? They may not know or be educated on how to service them. And the hope is once we get our liaisons together, that these liaisons can go back into their community, work with the high school partners. When Sandy and I get together and I come out and do a training for a high school session, Sandy's going to be right there with me. So will Lake County. Whatever our institutional partners are in that area, we want to collaborate and say like, hey, these are the resources. Here's your collective supportive resources. That's what the statewide network, this is my vision of what we can do so that we could have that united front with one another. And so that if there is issues of concern, and obviously with this position there is, that we hold our institutions accountable. So that it's not just you addressing this issue with leadership, but that your allies come back, that we could come in and back you up to make sure that you have that support.
there's two questions, Tanya, in the chat. One of them is clarifying about House Bill 4332. And does it also include other health careers like dental hygienists, sonography? I don't know the detail of that one.
Sorry, yeah. So the one thing is they're under the Illinois Department of Public Health Registry, and I think those are Ms. Gomez de la Casas, I know that's COD. But the one field that it does not include, because it's not under the Illinois Department of Public Health, is the EMT. The emergency medical technician is not under this bill, which is like, ooh, some of our kids don't want to go like even though I don't think EMT gets paid enough, you know, they may want to go into the fire department or something like that. And those are obviously works that we're looking into. And then I think there was another question, Sandy.
Yeah, let me see. What do you think the best way to determine how many DACA undocumented students are on your campus, especially if you haven't disclosed status and you want to keep a list? I asked so we can make the case. So this is always interesting to me, Rachel. So we know like roughly around 250 at NIU, and I think it's more than that, right? And so can you kind of get an estimate? You can, especially now with the RISE Act, right? Because you can see how many people applied for the RISE Act. So you could have an unofficial list of sorts. But at my campus, I have a ton of students who don't qualify for the RISE Act. So that list is not accurate. It could be more, it could be inflated even. And I'm willing to bet community colleges, you're all seeing a lot of people who don't qualify for the RISE Act. So your numbers are not going to be, you know, matching up either. But the problem is when I told someone that we had over like we had 200, back in the day it was like 2 something, right? Or 200, whatever. A professor said to me, well, does that even merit a full-time person? Not understanding, and it's our job, I think, to educate people the nuances and the complexities of holding this identity, of being labeled undocumented and having these barriers against you, and how much it puts on a student, and how we're trying to talk about legal, about mental health, about funding, about housing, all the wraparounds, where typically a student can go to like 10 different offices to get all those different things. We tend to be the one place where they trust the most, that we have to do a lot of that work and a lot of the advocating and a lot of that outreach, because we don't want the students having to do the advocating and possibly triggering like a horrible experience or a memory and having to do that. So it's on us to push back again and say, we do need people. We do need this time. We, you know, and trust me, I did this job for, I don't know, like 8 years before I got the position. And it was a struggle. I had to do it on top of my job at nights, on weekends. Still do that actually, but because there's so much to do, right? So I just think about, lay out all the needs of your students, have conversations with your students, and have them do that ask, because they need to hear from those directly affected. You and I could be talking about this all day in a vacuum, but until the students who are paying that fee, that tuition, are saying those words, that's when you're going to have action. The work at NIU didn't happen overnight. It was a decade in the making. And it was because of the students that this happened, and it continues to happen. So I just wanted to put out there, yeah, county data could be used to show possibly, that's a great one that I said, that I did use some of the DeKalb County data to show that this is the amount of immigrants, and to show that it wasn't just Latinos or Latinas, right? Oh, what I was saying I'm not sure who Harold Washington is here, but what I was saying in the reflecting of the numbers, sometimes people are like, well, we have so many RISE Act applications, so that's how many undocumented students we have. Well, that's not true, right? Because you have a lot of students who don't qualify for the RISE Act. And I say this because a lot of my African students actually came from city colleges, and they said that, and it was different, right? They said they tried different community colleges or city colleges, but they went to city colleges and they didn't qualify for the RISE Act. So if you're only tracking by the RISE Act applications, you're going to miss all those students who are recent arrivals or who have not done 3 years of high school or schooling in Illinois, and they won't qualify. That's what I meant. Does that help, or does that clear it up a bit? Like, we can't just depend on RISE Act numbers to say that's our population of undocumented students. Yes?
Sorry, I saw another question with regards to Marisol at Morton to hold accountable, right? And that was the meeting that we had the other day because some members were talking about it, and I'm waiting to get some emails on it. But for accountability, this is where this annual report that we've been submitting since 2012 or 2011 to talk about the best practices and making sure that these schools are accountable. This annual report was kind of like a report card that we give to the legislators, both in the House and the Senate, to Senator Villanueva's immigration task force, say like, hey, based of all the work happening across the state at the community colleges and our liaisons who are doing this work, something that's recommended is, hey, let's lift the 3-year bar on academics for high school and GED, because now we have TPS and, you know, refugees and asylum seekers, that this population is going to continue to grow and stay with us as an immigrant-friendly state. But how are we going to provide access to resources and support for that population if we do not allow, you know, Utah did it, a couple other states have done it. So we have best practices from other partners in the US that we can say it makes an impact. And it's California, they have, it's a bit confusing, but the AB 540 bill has pieces of it that talks about like, hey, if you did 2 years at a community college and you did 1 year of high school, then you qualify for it. And I'm not sure if that's correct, but like I said, it's a little, not familiar too detailed, whatever, but it was confusing for you. But lifting this 3-year requirement, you know, again, it's about providing access. And one of these is looking at our policies and our legislation, like, hey, it's a little outdated, you know, with the change of times, we need to review this. And this annual report will hold institutions accountable, because again, we have to remember that Senator Villanueva heads Appropriations Committee of Higher Ed Funding. And so when we had this conversation, so I don't understand why you haven't hired someone, because you were given funding and you should have been preparing for the liaison, the undocumented student liaison, the food insecurity, the what do you call them when they're opt out of 18 and they don't have family members. I don't want to say orphans, but I can't remember the term right now, but making sure that these students are the different liaisons that were implemented in state law. And you have to understand, Ruth McCarthy, the lawyer who's following up and implementing these laws, it's a one-woman show. And so I was like, hey, let me, in the education piece, connect me. I need to get connected to these people, and having these conversations and getting this pushback and saying, well, we thank you in a professional tone, you know, I don't get too bad, but in a professional tone, making sure that, look, I understand, like, I want to work with you, not against you, but we can't have anybody from financial aid. There's no way that people will feel comfortable having OIS oversee this opportunity of supporting students. And students may not feel comfortable, and it's also creating a tracking system, reporting system, which we don't want. And so making sure that our institutions are being held accountable. And if not, then I have to go out there. We have to send a team to support these liaisons. And that's why the importance of having this group together is to finally say, hey, we're a united front. It's not just me, Sandy and Luvia, or Elizabeth Gomez de la Casa, or Aurora Chang. Like, it's not just that, but it's a whole group of us coming together to provide that support and say, hey, we're doing this. How can I do that? Working and collaborating further to support one another.
Thank you. I know we're out of time. I really appreciate you all being here and holding space for our presentation and the work that you all are doing. So many of you doing so much work and not getting, you know, the recognition, the pay, or the title, and that's what we're hoping to change. But we really do appreciate, you know, sharing best practices, sharing resources. Please reach out to us if you need anything. And I couldn't have said it better than Cindy. Every student deserves it, right? Regardless if we have 1 or 1,000, we need to be supporting our undocumented students. So thank you again, and hopefully we'll see you at the student panel in about 5 minutes. I'm going to stop the recording. Thanks.
Good job, Doctora.